And people need to recognize that it's not some kind of, those of us who have been so much influenced by violence in the media, in particular pornographic violence, are not some kinds of inherent monsters. We are your sons and we are your husbands. And we grew up in regular families, and pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today. He snatched me out of my home. It snatched me out of my home 20, 30 years ago.
How does the story of justice turn into one filled with more questions than answers? Ted Bundy, a man whose name became synonymous with terror, had finally been sentenced to death for his gruesome crimes. But what truly happened behind the calm mask he wore so well? Florida's Stark Prison became Bundy's final stop, a place where the nation hoped he would finally reveal the full extent of his evil. Yet, even in confinement, Bundy's manipulative nature remained intact. 30 confirmed murders. But was that the real number? Bundy's confessions hinted at more victims, leaving families desperate for closure. How did Bundy manage to charm his way through life while leaving a trail of devastation in his wake? And what drove him to commit such unimaginable crimes? These were the questions that haunted investigators as Bundy awaited his execution. These are the questions that will haunt you as we dig deeper into the events that led to Ted Bundy's sentenced death. Was this tragedy preventable? And most importantly, who is to blame? Stay with us as we uncover the full story, piece by piece. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell if you don't want to miss the truth behind this tragic story. What did the world see in Ted Bundy? Or better yet, what didn't they see? Bundy's boyish good looks and charisma masked a deeply disturbed mind. He could manipulate anyone, friends, family, even law enforcement, into believing he was innocent. On death row, Bundy used every opportunity to play the system, prolonging his life through appeals and calculated cooperation with authorities. But beneath his charm lay a predator. Bundy didn't just kill. He thrived on control, manipulating his victims, the media, and even his captors. Was this ability to deceive his greatest weapon? Or was it society's inability to recognize the warning signs? Bundy's story wasn't just about murder. It was a chilling lesson in the dangers of trust and complacency. Bundy's ability to evade justice was as shocking as his crimes. He escaped from custody twice, once by jumping from a courthouse window, and again by sawing through his jail cell ceiling. Each time, he used his intelligence and charm to outwit law enforcement. But how did Bundy, a man accused of such heinous acts, manage to exploit the system so effectively? These escapes were not just physical, they were psychological. Bundy knew how to manipulate those around him, creating opportunities where none should have existed. What made him believe he could keep running? And how close did he come to escaping for good? Bundy's ability to deceive wasn't just a testament to his cunning. It was a chilling reminder of how dangerous he truly was. As his execution date neared, Bundy began confessing to more crimes. In a series of interviews, he detailed how he lured, attacked, and killed his victims. But his confessions were never complete. He provided just enough information to keep authorities engaged while withholding key details. Was this his way of maintaining control, even in his final days? Bundy's cooperation in the Green River Killer investigation further highlighted his manipulative nature. While his insights proved valuable, they also prolonged his life, giving him a twisted sense of purpose. Could Bundy's final confessions be trusted? Or were they just another performance in a life defined by deception? The pain Bundy caused didn't end with his victims. For their families, the fight for justice was a long and grueling process. Courtrooms became places of torment, where they had to relive the horrors of their loved ones' final moments. Every detail of Bundy's crimes was a new wound, a reminder of the lives stolen too soon. But these families didn't just endure, they fought back. They pushed for changes in laws, advocating for better protections and harsher penalties for violent offenders. Their resilience turned tragedy into a force for change. Yet, even as they worked to prevent future atrocities, the question remained, Could Bundy have been stopped earlier? Even on death row, Bundy's mind never stopped working. He seemed calm, cooperative even, but what was his endgame? Interviews with Bundy revealed glimpses of a man who thrived on control. He knew investigators wanted answers about unsolved cases, and he dangled those answers just out of reach. Was he playing for time? Or was it something more sinister, a need to keep people guessing, even in his final days? Bundy's behavior on death row raised questions about his true intentions. He appeared willing to confess, but his accounts were often riddled with half-truths and omissions. Could his cooperation be trusted, or was it just another manipulation? The closer Bundy's execution date came, the more his motive seemed shrouded in mystery. Did Bundy fear death, or did he see it as the ultimate stage for his performance? In the mid-1980s, investigators turned to Bundy for help in solving the Green River Killer case. Bundy's knowledge of serial killer behavior was disturbingly accurate. He suggested that the killer would return to the crime scenes to relive the murders, a theory that proved instrumental in catching Gary Ridgway. But why did Bundy offer this help? Was it a bid to delay his execution, or was it an attempt to cement his legacy as more than just a killer? Bundy's involvement in the case was both chilling and fascinating. He spoke about the mind of a murderer with a detachment that made his insights all the more unnerving. But working with Bundy came at a cost. His manipulative tendencies kept investigators wary, and his advice always seemed calculated. Could they trust a man who had spent his life deceiving everyone around him? Bundy was no ordinary prisoner. Even on death row, he dreamed of freedom. Guards discovered crude tools hidden in his cell, evidence of yet another escape plan. But how did Bundy manage to plot such schemes under constant surveillance? Did he genuinely believe he could outsmart the system one last time? The audacity of Bundy's plans was a reminder of his relentless determination. For Bundy, confinement was never an option. His need for control extended beyond prison walls. But with each failed attempt, the question remained. How far was Bundy willing to go to avoid facing the electric chair? And what would he have done if he had succeeded? Bundy's final victim wasn't one of his countless victims, or even the families left grieving. It was himself. As his execution date neared, Bundy seemed to unravel. The confidence he once exuded was replaced with a quiet desperation. He offered new confessions, hinted at undiscovered crimes, and even blamed his actions on external influences like pornography. Was this genuine remorse, or was it just another act? The most haunting question of all remained unanswered. Why? Why did Bundy do what he did? His explanations never provided the closure investigators or families sought. Instead, they left behind a chilling realization. Some crimes defy explanation. Bundy's life ended in the electric chair, but the questions about his motives, his victims, and his legacy lingered on. January 24th, 1989. Ted Bundy's execution day. Crowds gathered outside Stark Prison, some holding signs demanding justice, others celebrating the end of a reign of terror. Inside, Bundy's demeanor was calm but distant. He refused a last meal and spent his final hours in prayer. Was he preparing for a redemption, or was this just another calculated move? When the time came, Bundy offered no final words. He sat in Old Sparky, Florida's infamous electric chair, as witnesses watched. The moment the switch was pulled, a collective silence fell over the room. Ted Bundy was gone, but the questions he left behind would haunt the world forever. What did his silence mean? And how many secrets did he take with him to the grave? As the sparks from Old Sparky faded, so did Ted Bundy's life. But with his death came an unsettling realization. Many of Bundy's secrets would remain buried forever. In his final days, Bundy confessed to over 30 murders, but investigators believed the true number could be much higher. How many families would never know the fate of their loved ones? How many crimes went unpunished? Bundy's refusal to fully cooperate left a void that may never be filled. For years, Bundy teased investigators with cryptic clues and incomplete confessions. He spoke in riddles, withholding vital details that could have brought closure to grieving families. Why did he choose to remain silent about some victims? Was it a final act of cruelty, or did Bundy fear exposing truths that might shatter the carefully constructed image he had built? His death marked the end of his reign of terror, but it left behind an endless series of haunting questions. One of the most chilling aspects of Ted Bundy's crimes was the trust he inspired in his victims. Young women saw him as safe, charming, and approachable. He feigned injury, pretended to need help, and played the role of the boy next door. But how did Bundy hide his true nature so well? What made his victims overlook the warning signs? The trust Bundy exploited wasn't limited to his victims. Even after his conviction, women wrote to him, visited him, and some even fell in love with him. Carol and Boone, a friend turned romantic partner, married Bundy during his trial and later gave birth to his child. What did these women see in Bundy? And more disturbingly, did they see the monster he truly was and choose to ignore it? Bundy's ability to manipulate extended far beyond his crimes, leaving a legacy of psychological horror. Bundy's intelligence and cunning were undeniable. Twice he managed to escape custody, each time leaving authorities scrambling and the public terrified. His first escape, leaping from a courthouse window, seemed almost unbelievable. How could a man accused of such heinous crimes exploit a moment of carelessness? His second escape, sawing through the ceiling of his cell, was even more elaborate. What drove Bundy to take such risks? For Bundy, escape wasn't just about freedom. It was about power. Each successful attempt reinforced his belief that he was smarter than everyone else. But his escapes also revealed a troubling truth about the system. Complacency allowed a predator to walk free. What would have happened if Bundy hadn't been recaptured? And how many lives would have been lost in the process? In the final days leading up to his execution, Bundy granted a series of interviews that became known as the confession tapes. With a calm and detached demeanor, he described his crimes in horrifying detail. He explained how he lured his victims, the methods he used to kill them, and even his thoughts during the murders. But how much of what Bundy said could be trusted? Was he finally coming clean, or was this another act of manipulation? Bundy's confessions were chilling not only for their content, but for his lack of emotion. He spoke as though recounting a mundane event, showing no remorse for the lives he destroyed. Investigators listened intently, desperate to glean any information that could lead to unsolved cases. But Bundy's selective memory left many wondering. Was he revealing the truth, or was he still playing his twisted game, even in the shadow of death? Ted Bundy's involvement in the Green River Killer case remains one of the most controversial chapters of his life. As investigators sought to profile the elusive killer, Bundy offered his expertise. He suggested that the murderer would likely revisit the crime scenes to relive his crimes, a theory that proved true. But why did Bundy volunteer to help? Did he genuinely want to assist, or was this just another ploy to delay his execution? The insights Bundy provided were invaluable, yet they came at a cost. Working with Bundy meant engaging with a manipulative predator who thrived on control. His advice, while accurate, often felt like a game. Investigators had to weigh the benefits of his expertise against the moral dilemma of relying on a serial killer to catch another. Did Bundy's assistance ultimately make him more dangerous? And how much of his involvement was motivated by a desire to outshine the Green River Killer? As Ted Bundy's execution date loomed closer, prison guards noticed something unusual. Bundy, despite his impending death, remained as calculating as ever. Hidden within his cell, they discovered crude tools, evidence of yet another escape plan. How could a man watched so closely still plot his way out? Was Bundy genuinely hopeful, or was this part of his twisted need to maintain control? The tools, fashioned from everyday items, were a stark reminder of Bundy's resourcefulness. But the chilling question remained: what would he have done if he had succeeded? The world had already witnessed the aftermath of his previous escapes. More murders, more lives destroyed. This time, Bundy's failure wasn't just a victory for the guards. It was a narrow escape for society itself. But how close had they come to losing him again? Even in the shadow of death, Ted Bundy retained an inexplicable hold over some women. Letters poured into his prison cell, many of them from admirers. Some saw him as misunderstood, others as a victim of circumstance. But what kind of person could overlook the evidence, the confessions, the horror? What did these women see in Bundy? Or perhaps the better question is, what didn't they see? Carolyn Boone, who married Bundy during his trial, was the most infamous of these believers. She stood by him, bore his child, and defended him against all odds. But why? Was she blinded by love, or did she refuse to accept the truth about the man she adored? Bundy's ability to manipulate wasn't limited to his victims. It extended to anyone willing to fall under his spell. How did he maintain this power, even in the face of undeniable evil? Bundy's execution was scheduled multiple times, only to be postponed again and again. Legal appeals, delays, and his manipulative cooperation with investigators gave him more time. For the families of his victims, each delay was a fresh wound, forcing them to relive the pain of their loss. Did Bundy's legal team truly believe in his innocence, or was this simply a tactic to prolong his life? With each delay, Bundy seemed to grow more emboldened. He granted interviews, played games with the press, and continued to withhold key details about his crimes. Was he afraid of death, or was this just another performance? For the victims' families, every passing day without justice felt like an eternity. And for Bundy, each delay was a chance to remain the center of attention. January 23rd, 1989. The night before his execution, Ted Bundy requested a visit from a spiritual advisor. He appeared calm, collected, almost eerily so. But what was going through his mind? Was he seeking redemption? Or was this another calculated move to shape his legacy? Bundy spent hours in his cell, alternating between prayer and silence. Guards reported that Bundy seemed unusually reflective, as if grappling with his own mortality. But could a man like Bundy truly feel remorse? The eerie quiet of his final night raised questions that would never be answered. Was Bundy finally confronting the weight of his crimes? Or was this the calm before his ultimate performance? On January 24th, 1989, Ted Bundy's time ran out. Crowds gathered outside Florida's Stark prison, chanting and waving signs. "Burn, Bundy, burn," the crowd roared, as if the execution could somehow erase the pain he had caused. Inside, Bundy was led to the electric chair, his face expressionless. What was he thinking in those final moments? Did he feel fear, regret, or nothing at all? Bundy refused to make a final statement. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos he had caused in life. When the switch was pulled, witnesses described the scene as both horrifying and surreal. Bundy was gone, but the scars he left behind would remain forever. Did his execution bring justice, or did it simply mark the end of an era of unimaginable horror? The execution was supposed to bring closure. As the news broke that Ted Bundy had taken his final breath, the crowd outside the prison erupted in cheers. But inside the hearts of the victims' families, the wounds still felt fresh. They had their justice, but the weight of unanswered questions remained. Did Bundy win in the end by taking his secrets to the grave? Investigators pored over Bundy's final confessions, hoping to uncover hidden clues. Yet, for many families, the answers they sought never came. Bundy's refusal to fully cooperate left investigators chasing ghosts. How many women had fallen victim to him? Could more have been saved if his manipulations hadn't delayed justice? Bundy was gone, but his legacy of fear and mystery continued to haunt those he left behind. Bundy confessed to 30 murders, but law enforcement believed the real number could be much higher. How many names were missing from his list? And why did he only admit to certain crimes? Bundy seemed to relish holding back, keeping his darkest truths as a final act of power. Investigators combed through cold cases, trying to match patterns and find connections. But how do you solve crimes when the only witness is dead? Some victims' families clung to the hope that Bundy's death would lead to new discoveries. Others feared they would never know the fate of their loved ones. Bundy's selective confessions seemed calculated, as though he enjoyed the torment of keeping families in the dark. How many lives did Bundy destroy beyond the women he killed? And how many stories will remain untold forever? Even in death, Bundy's name remained on everyone's lips. News outlets dissected his execution, and documentaries rehashed his crimes. Bundy's face was plastered across books, magazines, and television screens. But why were people so captivated by such a monstrous figure? Was it his ability to blend into society, his intelligence, or the sheer horror of his crimes? This fascination wasn't without consequences. Some feared that the media's obsession with Bundy glorified his actions, giving him the notoriety he craved. Others argued that understanding Bundy could help prevent future predators. But the question lingered. By keeping Bundy's story alive, were we honoring his victims, or giving him exactly what he wanted? Not all of Bundy's victims perished. A handful of women managed to escape his grasp, each with a harrowing story of survival. These survivors became living proof of Bundy's depravity, their testimonies offering chilling insights into his methods. But how did they escape where so many others couldn't? And how did they cope with the knowledge of how close they had come to death? Survivors described Bundy as both charming and terrifying. One moment, he was polite and disarming. The next, his true nature surfaced. Their courage in recounting their experiences shed light on the red flags many had missed. But for these women, survival came with a price. Lifelong trauma and the haunting memory of a man who seemed unstoppable. As the dust settled, law enforcement, psychologists, and the public began to ask difficult questions. Could Bundy's killing spree have been prevented? His behavior in childhood and young adulthood revealed troubling signs: obsessive tendencies, violent fantasies, and a knack for manipulation. But why weren't these red flags acted upon? Bundy's case exposed flaws in the criminal justice system, from his escapes to the way his charm shielded him from suspicion. It also highlighted the importance of recognizing predatory behavior before it escalates. How many lives could have been saved if society had been better equipped to spot a monster in disguise? And how can we ensure that the next Bundy is stopped before it's too late? Ted Bundy's death marked the end of his life, but not the end of his story. His crimes cast a long shadow over the decades that followed, influencing everything from criminal profiling to public awareness campaigns. Bundy became a case study for law enforcement, a blueprint for understanding the psychology of serial killers. Yet, his shadow was not confined to academic discussions. Bundy's story seeped into popular culture, inspiring films, books, and even fan followings. For some, this attention felt like a betrayal of his victims. Was society too focused on the monster and not enough on the lives he destroyed? How do we balance learning from Bundy's crimes with honoring those who suffered at his hands? For every victim Ted Bundy named, there were countless others whose stories were left untold. Authorities suspected the true scale of Bundy's crimes far exceeded what he admitted to, but without his cooperation, many families would never know the fate of their missing daughters. How many lives had Bundy taken that would remain hidden in the shadows of his manipulative games? Investigators revisited cold cases, hoping to match evidence with Bundy's methods. Remote locations, skeletal remains, and chilling similarities pointed to Bundy's handiwork, but definitive proof often remained elusive. Did Bundy enjoy the knowledge that he still controlled the narrative? Even in death? The silence surrounding his unnamed victims was deafening, a haunting reminder of how much darkness one man could leave behind. Bundy's two escapes weren't just moments of law enforcement failure. They were chapters of terror that extended his killing spree. After leaping from a courthouse window in Aspen, Colorado, Bundy disappeared for 6 days. Authorities scrambled to track him, but during that brief freedom, Bundy reveled in his ability to outsmart the system. The second escape, from his jail cell in Glenwood Springs, was even more shocking. Bundy meticulously planned his breakout, losing weight to fit through a hole he'd carved into the ceiling. Once free, he made his way to Florida, where he unleashed his most savage attack at the Chi Omega sorority house. How could someone so dangerous slip through the cracks twice? And what lessons did law enforcement learn too late? The Chi Omega murders remain some of Bundy's most brutal and senseless crimes. On January 15, 1978, Bundy broke into the Florida State University sorority house and unleashed a frenzy of violence. Within minutes, he had bludgeoned and strangled 4 young women, killing 2 and severely injuring 2 others. The horror of that night sent shockwaves through the campus and beyond. But why did Bundy choose that sorority? Was it opportunity, or was it part of a calculated plan? Survivors described a scene of unimaginable terror. Rooms splattered with blood, shattered belongings, and the eerie silence that followed Bundy's retreat. The Chi Omega murders highlighted the sheer savagery of Bundy's crimes and his complete disregard for human life. Could anything have stopped him that night? Ted Bundy's execution on January 24, 1989, was a moment of grim justice for many, but for others, it was simply the end of a chapter. Crowds outside the prison cheered, some holding signs that read, "Burn Bundy, burn." But for the families of his victims, the cheers did little to ease their pain. Justice had been served, but closure remained elusive. Bundy's refusal to fully confess left a legacy of uncertainty. His final silence was not an act of redemption, but a final, cruel manipulation. How many families would continue searching for answers he had taken to his grave? And what lessons did his life and crimes leave behind? As the switch was pulled and Bundy's reign of terror came to an end, one question lingered. Could another like him rise again?